My God, Pixelmator Pro is 50 quid. Oh, Christ, I've just accidentally bought it. No, stop that.
What?
It's well worth it. What it does.
Yeah, 50.
I've
If
not
that's
seen it
perpetual,
for
It's
a
not
few
just
years.
it's not just like Photoshop bitmap editing. It's also all the vector graphics and stuff as well.
Yeah, but I mean, I did use it on the iPad a few years ago. Admittedly, I haven't touched it for a while, but then like Affinity and
Absolutely,
the others
Affinity's
seemed
lovely,
to
as we
knock it
know.
into a
Yeah, yeah,
cocked
yeah.
hat, so I stopped bothering with it.
And I must confess my allegiance. I mean, I've got a full license for it's here on this machine, and I confess I would normally go to the Affinity stuff as my first port of call. But it is a very powerful platform.
I'll
I
have to give
got
it another
fed up.
look.
I got fed up of Affinity, although it's really good at many things. If you run into quirks or bugs or anything, I just found it was not well supported and not very consistent. And I'm afraid it takes a lot to. I've got nearly 30 years experience of Photoshop now, so I just
Yeah, it is
I
Yeah,
tough.
well, it's that muscle memory thing, isn't it?
yeah,
You know.
exactly. It's even more than that. It's just like it's kind of like mentally, you know exactly what is available to you and what you need to do to achieve a certain outcome.
Yeah. What do you mean I've blue screened, Paul Riley?
I guess your
Or is it my
monitor is
glasses
reflecting in
coating?
your.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
okay.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got. It looks like you've got something blue on your monitor. Whereas my reflection is quite white.
I'm sure I've not blue screened them on a Mac. Doesn't happen there, darlings. People are typing. Yeah. No, Jeff, you're absolutely right. They do just completely lock up.
Mine doesn't look up. Just very occasionally, the thing I'm using will just vanish, and there'll be a thing saying, "Oh, it closed. Would you like to reopen it?"
Oh, or would you like to
Maybe.
report this?
Yeah.
Would you like
as
to?
if that's going to make any difference?
Would you like to waste another 5 seconds of your life?
Very tempted by that Mac Mini. Still.
Yeah, as I was saying in the private chat last week, it's just I don't think I need it.
I don't need it, but
I mean, this doesn't get anywhere close to what I need to do on a daily basis. The only thing that's slightly gaming is slightly getting iffy on the Mac, but then I don't really use it as a gaming platform much anyway.
podcast producing is the most heavyweight thing I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, absolutely.
MP3 encoding is not that swift on the, well, at least not the tool I use on the M1, but it probably won't
Really?
be much different. Yeah, I mean,
What
it's
are you
fine,
doing?
but just save as MP3 from Ocean Audio. It takes about a minute, 2 minutes to do the hour. But
You
by
don't-
the way, it's 1 o'clock.
Okay. We should just put this out as a podcast. Much better. Yeah. Good afternoon and welcome to the PC Pro podcast. It is Thursday, the 7th of November 2024, and I'm Barry Collins, features editor of PC Pro. And with me today, it's got a slimmer crew of John Honeyball. Well, slimmer in the numerical sense. John Honeyball
Lightened. Yes.
and Darren Graham Smith.
Hello there.
Hello. And where are we? I've lost my script. We're starting with you, Darian, and Windows or Microsoft wants more of your money.
Yeah, well, perhaps. I mean, we've had quite a few correspondents, people writing into the magazine, etc., people chatting on Discord saying that they don't love Windows 11 and they're quite happy with Windows 10 to stick with it for as long as they're allowed to. And also, of course, some people can't upgrade their existing hardware to Windows 11. So Microsoft has now offered a sort of, not a solution, but a prolonging, let's say, much as it did, I think, with Windows XP for businesses. For users, for individuals, for consumers who want to continue running Windows 10 after the support cutoff date, which, as we all know, is the 14th of October next year. If you want to carry on using it, you'll be able to pay a one-time fee of $30 US, to receive a further year of critical and important security updates. Obviously, no new features, but you should at least get some protection against, the new ransomware that comes along at the start of 2026 or whatever. Microsoft is currently saying this is just a one-off, one-year thing, and after that, to paraphrase, it really is dead. You really will have to get with the times. But it probably, I mean, $30 is little enough. I think that I suspect a lot of people will jump at it rather than deal with the upheaval of upgrading their OS and possibly their computer.
And just to be clear, this is consumers, not businesses we're talking about.
Yes, businesses have a separate deal, which I think has been going for a little while, which costs more and might include more support. But the consumer one is $30 and you're done for 1 year.
Yeah, John, the thing I was about to ask you is that given that we haven't yet had Windows 12, do you think this is a little bit cheeky?
Well, I mean, you can look at this from multiple sides. Let's be generous and look at it from Microsoft's point of view, which is that the Windows 10 code base is not something that's been front and center for them for a while, despite, I guess, quite a lot of code commonality between 10 and 11. And 11 is where they want everything to be, and so on and so forth, right up until the moment that they do a Windows 12, in which case Windows 12 will where they want everything to be. So I can see their point of view, which is they believe that they want to kill it off at some point. I mean, we've had the discussions about the history of 10X and how I personally think they should have just kept Windows 10 going on for another 10 years or something as a code freeze and bifurcated off onto a new platform. But they haven't. They did Windows 11. So, we can't go back on that. $30. The question is, I guess really, the question is, what do we mean by support and updates? I mean, obviously things like Windows Update and kernel patches and stuff like that. But does it, or rather turn the question on its head, will they still be doing updates for Windows Defender after the shutdown point, as it were? Because from that point of view, that's Microsoft's antivirus, which you can argue is a little bit different to OS. Do we know the answer to that? I know I'm being a bit abstruse here, but
no, I think it's a great point.
I'm just digging now. I think it is included because when they say critical and important security updates, they have kind of, although it's not very clear from the user's perspective, I believe that all security updates come down the same channel, even though some of them are requested or pushed to Windows Defender and others remain in the slower pool.
I could absolutely see, Darian, how that would be the case. I'm just wondering if there's a separation here between sort of the antivirus-y bit versus the operating system bit.
I'm digging now. If I can find out in the next 2 minutes while you're talking, I will let you know.
But sorry, I was going to say, I can see their point of view. $30 is clearly an arbitrary amount. It's a number they plucked out the air to try and make you really want to have it, rather than just being like $4.99 and a packet of crisps. So there's an element of please don't do this in this. The problem, of course, is as Darren, as you have said, is the machines that won't upgrade. I mean, over to my left, I have this very nice Dell XPS 28-inch, which is a lovely piece of kit, despite the fact that its screen is delaminating in a very odd way. But that's nothing to do with Windows, I'm sure. And it won't do Windows 11, and it still won't do Windows 11. And if I want to say supported, do I take up the business contract use for this, because I couldn't legitimately do the personal one at $30, or is it, aside from the screen problems, is it time to junk it and move on for what is a perfectly usable piece of kit? Sorry, Darren.
So I can confirm that, they've said they've committed to updating Windows Defender on Windows 10 through, quote, at least October 2028. Which obviously is well past the supposed end of support. So I'm just looking now to see whether, I think it might be that is because big enterprise customers may have the option of extending even further beyond 2026, which is all consumers are being given, in which case it would be like no extra cost for Microsoft to keep on.
And of course, as we have said on so many times, we could write a songbook about it. Anything to do with Microsoft and licensing is always unbelievably obtuse, difficult to understand, and almost couched in enough nonsense to make you think it's entrapment.
Do you think many consumers will pay this fee?
I think they will, because I think anybody who hasn't upgraded to Windows 11 now, I think is intentionally avoiding it, and I think the price is low enough that they'll pay it happily just to push off the decision and the upheaval for another 12 months.
I'm actually I'm going to disagree with you there, Darren. Which who knew? Which is that I think an awful lot of people will just basically not notice and not care. They will just say, "Oh, well, it hasn't updated. Who knew?" And because they almost see, for a lot of people who are not nerds like us, they see Windows Update as being an unwelcome evil that takes up time and stops them doing what they want to do and requires a reboot and all of this stuff that just gets in the way of them using their appliance. And so if that just kind of stops, I guess the key question will be when the deadline comes, and if you haven't signed up and therefore are blessed in some way with that particular installation, is there going to be a great big Microsoft banner come up to say,
Yes,
you are now no longer
Exactly what I was
supported,
gonna say.
you are really in a dangerous bad place, and horrible evil things will happen, and nasty people out there will come for your firstborn. Now, if that happens, people might actually do something about it. The question is whether some legislators will look at that and say that looks like forced upgrade to me.
I was going to say there's an amazing opportunity here for scammers to get in and put a big thing on your Windows desktop saying Windows 10 is exiting support. Just give us your credit card details and we'll sort it out. But actually, as I was putting that thought together, I realised that probably there aren't that many people out there who have any idea about end of support, etc. Probably they'd get more if they'd reel in more Joes if they just went with the exact same techniques they always do. Your PC has a virus. I'm overthinking it.
Maybe, but maybe not. I think you will almost certainly see the big flash change in Windows wallpaper saying this system is now insecure. We recommend you update, and then of course you're going to get the phishing emails saying click here to upgrade your Windows for $30. It's absolutely a given at this point. An opportunity to migrate to Linux Mint for some users to save themselves £30.
I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think if you haven't gone on to Windows 11 already, then there might be a million different reasons, but my perception of the ones I've heard about is people who don't want to deal with the upheaval and the pain of it, of moving away from something familiar. So going to Linux Mint would be that times 7 or 8.
Perhaps.
But it would be interesting to know how many sort of Windows 7, Windows 8 systems there are still out there. I mean, there must be metrics on this out on the intertubes. Because that might give us an idea of just how much
still huge. Over 50,
shedware is out there. Yeah,
over 50% of Windows installations are still Windows 10. So I'm seeing on comments like Jeff saying this is all very old stuff now. Sodom, move on. But
and he has a
you've
point.
Still got to a degree, but there's still a huge installed base out there. And the thing is, again, I think there's an element of Microsoft playing chicken here to some degree, because we've been here before, and they've made the situation themselves to some extent where they extend deadlines. Now, you're not telling me Microsoft as a responsible company, if uptake of this security patch system is very low, they're going to leave 20, 30, 40% of Windows desktops out there potentially unprotected from a serious attack. It's just not going to happen, and consumers know that. And I think it's very likely that either this deadline will get pushed back, as we've seen on previous Windows deadlines pushed back, especially if Windows 12 hasn't appeared in the meantime, or that Microsoft will back down and remove the cost of the security patches, or end up doing some kind of, this is an essential security patch, you're getting this one for free kind of thing. I cannot believe they will let, especially given what we've seen this year with the CrowdStrike incident, they're not going to leave masses and masses of Windows PCs vulnerable. So I've closed that topic down. That's fantastic.
That was a remarkably clean end to a topic there, Barry.
So let's move along. And the next story is about the launch of GPT Search, which happened at the tail end of last week. And so this is basically the building of a search engine into the ChatGPT interface. To all intents and purposes, ChatGPT, and this is only for the Plus subscribers, I should point at this stage, looks largely identical to what it was before, but there's now a new little sort of world icon in the prompt bar, so you can select that before you type a prompt, and that forces the AI to search online for answers. Previously, you could manually prompt it. You could say, check this answer online, and it would do so. But now that option is there to just click an icon. But this goes far beyond it just searching online for an answer. They've built an actual interface, much more like a search interface with some of the answers. So, for example, if I say, I want a new pair of trainers, I want to spend £50, I like Vans and Skechers, for example, it will go off and find examples of the Vans and Skechers trainers, give me a list of them, show me pictures of the ones it's recommending, a bit like Google Shopping does. If I say, show me 5 great Chinese restaurants in Brighton, it will produce a map and pin them on the map as Google does. So, the intention here is clear. It's going for the throat of Google. And I've been testing this quite heavily. I'm writing a guide about ChatGPTs. I've been testing this quite heavily over the past week or so. And there are lots of examples where this search goes above and beyond what you will get from a Google search. So there's several, I'd say, categories where it outperforms Google. The first is on multiple questions. So, for example, at the end of last week, I said, give me West Ham's next 5 fixtures and tell me how much ticket prices are. And it would list the next 5 fixtures and then say, if this is a category A game, your tickets are 100 quid, 80 quid, whatever. It gives really detailed topical answers. So, for example, you can say, as I did at the end of last week again, give me the latest update on the polls in the swing states, and it tabulates a table showing you the 7 swing states and what the latest poll data is for each of those states. That's an answer you didn't want to know, by the way. And
I think we know the answer.
Yeah, we do now. Yeah, I think it will get a different answer now. And contextual answers as well, it's really, really good at. So, again, at the end of last week, I asked it, would today be a good day to go and shoot Starling commemorations in Brighton? Anyone who lives in Brighton knows that about this time of year, the Starlings come back and start swirling around the old West Pier. And the answer was brilliant because without any real context that I provided, it said, today, Friday the 1st of November, is a suitable day to photograph the Starling commemorations. The weather forecast is good, with temperatures around 14 degrees, with light winds, which is favourable for observing these displays. The Starling commemorations typically observed from November to March. For optimal viewing and photography, it's advisable to arrive at the seafront between the piers of the Palace Pier and arrive about an hour before sunset. And as someone who's photographed these many times, that answer is practically perfect. But without me prompting it, it's given me a weather forecast, it's given me the dates when the Starlings are normally back in Brighton, and it's actually telling me the spot and the time to go and photograph these commemorations, which is amazing. You may get that if you searched in Google and it's doing AI bits itself, but you'd have to go to multiple sources probably to get that degree of answer. So, I sort of pumped out on social media last week. I think this is a huge, huge threat to Google because the degree and the sophistication of many of the answers, if you're not looking for just like trying to find answers specifically from a website, but you're asking more general questions or questions within the same prompt, I think it's extraordinarily good.
It's a new era of curation.
In what do you mean?
What I mean by that is that as the amount of information out there on the intertubes has got bigger and bigger and bigger, we then started moving to things like search engines to find stuff, and then search engines to well-known, trusted sites that could then provide us almost a curation of quality answers. So what I mean by that is, are we now seeing the ChatGPT search thing taking on the role of the curator to give you not just the pointer to the place where there might be some answers based by popularity or ad spend or number of clicks or whatever the metric is, but now an attempt at creating a high quality answer that isn't actually tied to any underlying specific source. The problem with that, of course, is why do I then trust its curation?
So a couple of counterpoints to that. So at the end of every point it makes, or almost every answer, it will give a little icon with the name of the source in it, and you can click on that source. So, for example, on that Brighton memorations thing again, where it's the Met Office was the link for the weather forecast, the West Pier company was the link for when the Starlings arrived. Brighton and Hove Council's website was telling you where to go and stand to see the memorations. So it does provide the sources. Now, I see David Artis on Discord is saying this is amazing by ripping off other people's research and recommendations. Yes, I take that point to a degree, but I'd argue that Google does likewise. Often when you type a question into Google and it pulls an excerpt from a website without actually taking you through to that website, the click-through rate on those kind of answers is shrinkingly small, vanishingly small. So I don't make any real distinction between what Google's doing there and what ChatGPT's doing here. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, discuss. So yeah, I agree, John, but I think it is. It's not just making this stuff up. It's going out and sourcing it from different places.
Quite so. But then there's the point which is just come into my head. You sent me that screenshot about the Starlings in Brighton.
Yeah.
And when I was reading it, I thought, this is really, really, really clever. Without question, this is really breakthrough, astonishing good stuff in terms of getting to an answer about something without actually then me having to wade through sites and then me having to work out whether this site is actually real or not, or good quality information or not. Problem I have is that if you look at something like Wikipedia and you put in a word or a name or something, it would quite often come back and say all the things, different areas that this could have been referring to, which one did you mean? Yeah. And I know this is an extremely obtuse example and it's extremely left field and I should be, laughed at for raising it. But your question was, what's the best place and time or whatever to shoot Starlings in Brighton.
Shoot Starling memorations in Brighton. Shooting Starlings.
Well, no, but the point was there was no extra bit at the bottom which said, "Did you actually mean what sort of gun should I use?" Right. So what I'm saying here is that there is an outright simplification, which you could argue quite legitimately. Shooting Starling murmurations means taking photographs for 90-something% of the times that someone's asking that question. The question is, I might have wanted a slightly more edge case answer, but it's not. I don't know. There's if we're not careful, there's a kind of an oversimplification going on here.
Yeah. So just before I bring in Darren, I'll say there's two things there. One. ChatGPT has memory, so it remembers facts from your previous conversations. And one of the facts it will know about me is I'm a photographer, because I've asked it lots about photography questions. So it may have inferred that from previous conversations. But okay. B, I would argue that it will be 99.99% of people who want to shoot Starling memorations want to do it on a camera, not with a shotgun. So
I said it was a very bad example, but nevertheless, I'm going back to sort of the wiki point of view, which can you disambiguate your question to give a more focused answer there? But the problem with an automatic system that's doing that based on you is that it might get things wrong, and will that matter? I don't know the answer to the question.
But that's the only thing is if it gets it wrong with the next prompt, you say no, I meant with a gun, not a camera, or whatever. It's fairly easy to correct that behaviour, and that's a problem in almost any walk of life, whether it's spell checks or Google searches or context is everything, and sometimes you lose context in written text. Darren, what do you make of all this?
Well, so as soon as you mentioned it, I know we've talked about this a little bit offline as well. I went to the website to give it a try, and I note that it's only available to paying subscribers.
Yeah.
They do say can try it now, which does suggest that maybe it will become free in future. But I wonder how expensive it is to operate this, and whether it will, whether it will ever be fully available for free. As I know, like the full power of ChatGPT, as I understand it, never has been available for free. At least maybe not since the early beta days. And I think obviously that's going to be it's a big barrier to overcome, not least because you can't. I'm coming back to my classic microtransactions piece about how if I could pay 5 pence to see what ChatGPT Search had to say about a particular thing that maybe Google wasn't working on for me, then I would give it a go and maybe get sucked into it. But the requirement of the fact that the whole thing is behind a paywall that may never be taken down just because of the realities of the demands of AI seems to me like it gives Google at least a temporary reprieve.
I would be quite pleased actually if these things, as part of their answer, gave you either a sort of a number of CPU counts or workload work factor, or even a dollar and cents costing of what it has cost to create this answer, because I think that is going to be a very interesting metric moving forward, because we can't just rely upon these companies burning through investors' cash indefinitely. That's not going to be a viable thing. And if you then put in about murmurations and stuff, and even if it said at the bottom, this has cost 4 cents to process, would you pay that? Yes, no. That would actually be kind of a very interesting set of metrics. But at the moment, they simply don't care. They're just burning cash.
I love it, and I love that idea of at the end of anything that you do online. I'd be very happy if it said, if you want to support this, then click here to just pay a penny, which was what it cost us to process or whatever. And I don't really understand. See, I'm doing the microtransactions rant again. I don't really understand, in a world where we have PayPal, we have Google Pay, we have Apple Pay, etc. You can't have an account which just racks up the pennies until it hits a fiver and then it gets sent off to its relevant directions. It's frustrating. I feel like it's been holding us back for decades, and this is yet another instance where it could perhaps make something more widely available.
Blockchain will fix all of that.
Yes. Well, now Mr. Musk is going to be a big cheese in the Trump administration. Who knows where we might end up.
The only point I'd just make on your thing about it being behind the paywall, Darren, is that this is typically how OpenAI works. They release new models or new features into the paid subscriber channel first before moving it to the free channel. And I believe they've announced that it will become free eventually. So
okay.
You may just need to hold tight, but this is their modus operandi. So just before we leave OpenAI and ChatGPT, today it appears, I think if you go now, in fact, to chat.com, that redirects to ChatGPT. And that's because OpenAI have apparently reportedly spent around $10 million to purchase chat.com from a private owner who apparently bought it in 2023 for $15.5 million. So, which seems like he's taking a bit of a haircut on that price. If the report, I find it. I mean, I don't know where this $10 million figures come from, and they're not disclosing it publicly. But I'd be surprised if it's sold for that little, and little in relative terms. But it does go to show that even in this day and age, there's still a huge premium to premium URLs such as chat.com, and that companies still think it's worth paying that money to grab those properties, even though I suspect the amount of people who type URLs directly into a web browser has vastly diminished in recent times.
That seems a lot of money. And the other thing, of course, is why didn't we all just register these things back in the 90s? Duh, because we could have done, and it was basically free back then to do it, and I feel very foolish.
Yes, there's some. In fact, I wrote a bit about a feature about this a while back, and with online domain auctions, and you should see some of the. I mean, it's a real business. People have portfolios of domain names and snap them up and sell them off again. But domain auctions, where companies effectively sometimes go bankrupt, and all the big registrars pick up the premium names and then resell them back to people at inflated rates. It's a whole industry.
And we could have that really ranty, boring, nerdy, and nasal discussion about all of the TLDs that have been pushed out there, and with the assumption that you should be buying all of these to protect your brand and your trademark, just turning it into a massive money-making machine. And don't even start me on why American companies should be .us rather than .com. But hey, I mean, yes, I'm going to sit back here and put my seatbelt on, because otherwise it'll all get very, very boring very quickly.
Well, it does seem like this is the kind of thing where AI should soon obviate the need to have a snappy and memorable URL, because, like, soon I'm sure I'll open up the browser and I'll say I want to search for this, and it will know what my preferred engine is, and I won't have to know a thing about the IP address or whatever.
Indeed. Well, John, next one's with you, and there's news about Windows on ARM emulation.
Yes, there's a couple of bits of Windowsy ARMness. Basically, just as a quick recap, the Windows on ARM it's an ARM processor. It's not Intel x32, x64 inside, so it can't run natively, cannot run old Windows or even current Windows, obviously, Intel targeted code. So inside Windows on ARM, it has this really cool piece of technology. There's been various versions of this around for years, even going back to the 1990s. Which would basically do a software code retranslate effectively between the Intel code and the native ARM instruction set. So basically it would allow your Intel code to run on your ARM chipset. Okay, I first really encountered this kind of code crawling stuff back in the 90s on Windows on Alpha, because they had, for that, there was actually a code nibbling engine that would go through the executable and take all of the instructions from the Intel world and convert them into ARM code. And actually, for good performance back then, when you quit the app, it saved out a cache of the armed of the code that had been translated onto Alpha, so it was ready to go next time you ran the app. So this kind of stuff has been around a while. Problem is that it takes a bit of CPU horsepower to do this, but these processors are so quick that's really not a terribly big problem. The bigger problem from the Intel world is that there is really no such thing as an x86 processor. They've been available with all sorts of little add-ons and extensions and processor extensions and so forth, by generation and so forth. And it's the job usually of the operating system to hide this, both from you as a user and also from the developers writing code for the platform. So what they are doing, what they've announced, and it's going out shortly now on build 27744, to the Canary channel for Windows 11 Insider Preview, so the sort of the nerd of the nerd out there. They've improved the emulator, so it will now support a whole bunch more of these processor extensions that have happened on the Intel family. Stuff like FMA, F16, BMI, AVX, AVX2, and so forth. And these will be able to be emulated as part of the emulator. Okay, so it's increased the capabilities of the pseudo processor. Why does this matter? It's hoped that firstly it will help more mainstream applications to run. One of them apparently is Premiere Pro 25 will now be able to run on ARM through the emulator while everybody waits for Adobe to do a native ARM version of Premiere Pro. So that was going to be a good thing. It may actually also help with some games that use AVX2, stuff like, I'm told, Starfield, Helldivers, who knows what they are. Apparently they're games, my lord. And so they may well be able to work because of the inclusion of AVX2 in the Intel to ARM subsystem emulator.
Okay.
And there's one other bit of news.
Go on.
Oh, the other bit of news is that Microsoft, the Microsoft recall, which we have talked about many times, sometimes in not so glowing ways, has been delayed again. According to Brandon LeBlanc, who's been around for years as a very senior person in the Windows team, they have delayed it now until I think it's December. They were hoping to go out in October, but it's now going to be out in preview for Windows Insiders on Copilot Plus PCs in December. So they're taking a bit more time to get this right, and maybe we will see it in some kind of quasi-final form before Christmas.
Yeah, December's going to be a big time for AI stuff, isn't it? Because isn't that when Apple launches its Apple Intelligence stuff over here? Like now we've got Recall pushed back to December as well.
Well, the Apple Intelligence stuff is available today in the UK on a UK phone with 18.1. You simply have to go into Siri and set the Siri language to US American, and it
Yeah.
now works. And
Yeah.
I've got it set up on my phone, and that's no betas, no nothing, no strangeness. But obviously, I must confess, having an American talking to me in CarPlay is extremely annoying, and I'm looking forward to December and 18.2 when I can have it in English. And of course, as I think we discussed last week or the week before, 18.4 probably it's about April time for all European languages.
Yes. So what do we make of this? I mean, we've come a long way with this emulation of Windows and ARM processors, haven't we? It's been much better in recent versions than it has been for a long while. Do you think we're going to reach this point where it is just parity between Intel and ARM processors? Well, let's shut you up.
I'll just dive in here. I don't know. I mean, it was interesting because they've done this, isn't it? This X64 forum or something. AMD and Intel, and they announced a few weeks ago. I'm sure we talked about it, trying to come together to have peace and harmony in the Intel instruction set world. And maybe it's about time that both of these major vendors kind of got their act together and stopped adding and bolting on these bits and actually had a more standardized platform. And that would help out because it would help the emulation side.
I mean, moving forward, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, the way it happens in the Mac world is just you basically tick a box and say, I want to compile this for Intel, I want to compile this for ARM. So it's always a bit surprising to me that any modern Windows app is not already platform agnostic. Looking back, though, it has been very frustrating. I'm not any sort of expert on code emulation or code translation, but I mean, Apple have done this twice, PowerPC to Intel and Intel to ARM, and both times, I mean, I'm not going to say it was a brilliant experience the first time, but it worked. Like there was pretty much, I'm not going to say there was pretty much nothing that you couldn't run on a new Intel Mac in 2004, whenever it was, but they had very good coverage from the start. And the move to ARM was fantastic, really impressive and effective and efficient. Lots of people were saying, I'm not sure about buying one of these new M1 Macs because all my software is Intel, and they found it was actually running faster in translation on ARM than it was on their old Intel Mac. So the fact that Microsoft can't get it right, and it might not be their fault, it might be, I'm very prepared to believe it's to do with the underlying architecture of the operating system and the huge variety of hardware and drivers it needs to work with. Even so, just the optics of it are frustrating at best.
I would say it's not the underlying. I would say, is it Microsoft's fault? No, not particularly, I guess. It depends which angle you're coming from it. The reason why Apple managed to do this is because Apple forces developers to stay very up to date on the current version of the developer tools. And therefore, if you look at something like iOS, for just as an example here, you can't put an iOS app into the App Store if it's more than a certain number of years old in terms of its supported the platform on which it was developed. Yeah, compare and contrast for good and for evil, but with Google Play Store, where you can still have Android 5 apps in the Play Store, for example. So Apple had that advantage; they got everything brought relatively closely, and therefore it was a much cleaner move. But the problem with certainly a larger app like a major Adobe thing is it's going to have years of code in it, and years of that code that possibly is going to be very difficult to unravel and do the simple port it to ARM that may actually not even work. It may not even work in the current Microsoft compiler platform. It may require all sorts of weird odds and bits and stuff that have been bunged in there, because that's the kind of accretion you get on older apps. And so they basically said, well, we can try and port this code, but it's going to take a while, or we just hope that the emulator will deal with it, because that's kind of less grief.
Okay. All right. Well, we obviously will stay across that. And talking of ARM and Intel, there's a lot of Intel news this week.
Yeah, well, Intel released its Q3 financials last week, and if you have a medium-length memory, you may recall that its Q2 financials were not so great. It reported an overall operating loss of $1.6 billion in the second quarter of this year. Now we finally got the latest figures this quarter, or the one just finished. It's reporting a loss of $17 billion. That is, yes, 10 times as much money gone as previously. But Intel has a good excuse for it, or you might say Intel has a good explanation for it, which is that it says that this is very much down to the costs of the restructuring it's doing, the dividing its business into Intel products and Intel Foundry, which they believe will put them on a good footing for making money efficiently in the future. And this is a testable claim, because Pat Gelsinger said that those costs are now basically over. That pain has been incurred. So it'll be interesting to see how things turn around in the next quarter. For the record, they made a revenue of 13.3 billion in Q3, and they projected that it will be almost identical next quarter. So that implies that their sales will be flat, which obviously is not in itself brilliant news, but it's better than it might have been. So if that carries on, then we'll see if the turnaround is real. Basically, I mean, they're far enough now into the plan of the new architectures and the new company structure that we would hope to be seeing some results by now. That's the first bit.
Okay, and there's some changes to the way they handle memory.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Actually, The Verge really annoyed me with this, because they said that Intel machines were going to start using memory sticks.
Yeah.
And I think everybody who had a camera in 2008 or whatever was like, what? Those little Sony things?
Yeah, Sony,
Yeah, it's DIMMs. So basically, Lunar Lake, the processors which you can buy right now, I think, in Intel thin and light laptops, they have memory on the package, just like MacBooks do, which means they can't be upgraded after you buy them, but they are super efficient in terms of memory bandwidth. Pat Gelsinger on the earnings call admitted, he didn't say it was bad. I think he kind of very implicitly admitted that it was a good thing in terms of design. What he did say was, it's not a good way to run the business. This is because it means that much more work and much more investment needs to go out to TSMC, Intel Foundry's competitor, who is manufacturing these chips. Makes the whole thing just less economically sound for Intel. So for entirely sort of mercenary financial reasons, even though it will probably reduce memory performance, future generations are going to go back to using DIMMs. And I think most people, to be honest, most Intel users will be happier to have upgradable memory than to have the performance benefits, but not everyone.
Okay. And finally, they've taken a bit of a blow in data centers this week.
They have. Well, this is actually to do with the financials. Intel's financials reveal that its data center and AI group made 3.3 billion in the quarter just past, which is less for the first time in history than AMD's data center segment, which got 3.5 billion. So Intel's been nosed out. The reason is probably because Intel's massively parallel 128 core server chips are just much more expensive than AMD's. So the companies that are spending really, really large amounts of money on mega data centers are finding it really makes sense to spend the big bucks with AMD. So even if the smaller ones are still using Intel, they've been gazumped. However, it is also worth mentioning that NVIDIA has reported that its GPU sales to data centers for the last quarter were 22 billion, which is 7 times as much as AMD or Intel. So that's the way the wind is blowing.
This I'm just going to throw in there because I've sort of been musing over this idea for my column. But AMD and Intel, would it make sense for them to combine forces at the moment, given they're both, well, less so AMD, but Intel's certainly struggling. AMD's doesn't really have its own manufacturing much these days. Would there be, given that, the wins, as you say, Nvidia fighting them from one side, you've got the ARM chips rising up from the other. Obviously, Apple's moved to its own infrastructure. Would it make
Well,
sense for the two
maybe.
to combine
I mean,
forces?
it might be a competitive thing because I believe those are the only two companies, certainly the only two big ones, with a license to make x64 chips. So that's still a vast market of desktop PCs, etc. But yeah, I mean, it's true that's not as unassailable as it would have been only 5 years ago. I think there's such a lot of history and such a lot of money involved. I don't think either one is in a position to buy out the other. Or maybe I'm mistaken about that. But yeah, in the long run, in the very long run, in 10 years' time, I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen. But I think I can't see what the path would be from where we are today.
Can I give a little shout out that yesterday, all three of us will vaguely remember through, at least in my case, an alcoholic haze. I understand the two of you were utterly sober. We had the PC Pro Awards lunch get together thing, and then a pub get together thing in the evening, which was all hugely delightful and lovely to see everybody and people from the production side of PC Pro and so forth. It was all great to see that, and from our overlords at Future and so forth. But also a lot of people from the industry were there. And my shout out is to the chap from Intel who put on the very best possible spin you could possibly put on Intel's financial results that we've just been talking about, and how this really is turning the corner, how Intel is in a fabulous position for the future and so forth. So I mean, 10 out of 10 for him. He deserved a PC Pro award for his marketing effort yesterday, because as you say, they are quite grim numbers, even if you accept that this is them turning the corner and not just driving off a cliff.
Well, John's provided a nice segue there because the reason we were in London, as John said, was there for the PC Pro Awards 2024. And that is what you'll find on the front cover of this month's magazine, which is, I believe, hitting the shelves today, if I'm not mistaken. And so the awards is the big feature there. So you can find out who you voted as best broadband provider, best mobile broadband network, best tablet, best laptop, best online retailer. All of the normal categories are in there. I think we've got 20 different categories off the top of my head, plus the editorial team's picks for hardware of the year and stuff like that. So that's our big annual awards roundup, of which many thousands of you contributed. So thank you very much for filling out the surveys. And if you go and spend your money, you'll be able to find out the results elsewhere in the magazine this month. What were you writing about, John? Do you remember?
Haven't got a clue. Oh no, actually the back page was I think it was about was Microsoft supporting Windows on ARM enough, which kind of is interesting based upon what we were talking about earlier. And it wasn't so much about the code level; it was more about the problems with the Snapdragon development kit and why aren't there desktop models and Intel NUC equivalents and so forth.
And Darren, what were you doing in the practical features section?
Well, I did a deep dive into styluses because I've got
Styli, aren't they?
Well, there's two schools of thought on that. At least stylodies. No, I got a bit puzzled myself with all. I mean, there's four sorts of Apple Pencil to start with, and that's before you dig into all the S Pens and so on. So I just had a bit of a look at the technology and the differences between them, and whether it's really worth paying 150 quid for one versus 20 for another. And elsewhere in the mag, Nick Rawlinson has done I think, long overdue rundown of all the different sorts of Raspberry Pi you can get, all the different capabilities and models, so you can pick the right one for whatever project you have going, and potentially save yourself £4.
Oh, and a shout out there. I was in Cambridge a couple of days ago, and I dropped into the Raspberry Pi shop in Grand Arcade, which is, I think it's owned by Raspberry Pi themselves, isn't it, that store? And it's a fabulous place of Pi-ness. If you want a Pi shop in person, that's the place to go. So just as a little reminder that's there.
And just before we stop plugging things, also mind you, in this issue, our dear leader did a big roundup of mini PCs, so that's worth checking out. And I'm also going to plug a news investigation that Roshan Huma and I did, looking at the Dark Trace, the security company that was recently taken over, and what's going on there. So much to read in the December issue of PC Pro, which is on sale now. And let's move along to NIbs, and we're starting with you, John.
Yes, Pixelmator Pro is a photo and graphics design and editing program. It doesn't just do pixel-based stuff, it does vector-based stuff as well. It's been around a long time. It's a very well-established product, and it's very, very good. I mean, you can do amazing stuff on this. It sells for about 49 quid or $49, that kind of thing. And the interesting news, there are other editing programs out there, obviously, but the interesting news of this week is that they have just been bought by Apple. So they are being drawn into the big Borg, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Apple does with this. Because, as I said, it's fully featured. It does the AI, it does all the retouching and removal of things and intelligent, all of that high-end stuff you would expect from a paint and drawing program. As I said, interestingly, all in one platform. Rather than having like Illustrator versus Photoshop. This is all in one, and it's a very, very powerful program, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what Apple does, if only because it's almost 10 years to the day since Apple put out the last update for Aperture, which those of us with long memories will remember was Apple's pro-grade photo taking, editing, modifying, archiving library tool, which was exceptionally good at the time. I really loved using Aperture, and Apple walked away from it for reasons that were not terribly obvious at the time, but it looks like Apple is going to push this out. It's available for Mac OS and for iPad. I have it on both, and it's a very strong tool. They've said it's all business as usual moving forward. But we'll have to wait and see what happens in terms of licensing and cost and future bits of Apple intelligence-ness that they're going to throw into this.
Okay. Second nib is Mozilla, the company behind the Firefox browser, who have announced they're going to be laying off 30% of their staff as they say they face a relentless onslaught of change. This may be on... maybe not as bad as it looks on the face of it, because according to this report on TechCrunch, the Mozilla Foundation had 60 employees in 2022, but apparently at the time these layoffs were announced, they had closer to 120 people. So it looks like they've upscaled staff considerably over the past year or so, and are now maybe retreating somewhat from that. Nevertheless, it does mean the demise of two departments in the company, advocacy and global programs, which are no longer part of our structure, according to the Mozilla CEO. So it looks like they're going to be doing less of their kind of outreach work. They've been doing a lot of privacy work over the past couple of years. So things like investigating dating sites and stuff like that. They've done some decent in-depth reports on privacy invasions and stuff. So it's a bit disappointing that that's gone. But as ever, it's becoming harder and harder to work out what Mozilla's function in life is, I'm afraid. But there we go. Darian.
And just to throw in here a point about, was it not part of the EU stuff or the American legal stuff about Google not being allowed to pay people for supporting them. So whether there's a question mark over Mozilla's funding from Google and how that's going to go, because that could just spectacularly implode. I am not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but you could see how that could be quite a risk for them.
Absolutely. Darren.
Yeah, so this is about Corning Gorilla Glass, which you probably know because between Apple and Samsung and a couple of others, it's found on more than 50% of all smartphones worldwide. The European Commission finds that a little bit suspicious, and they've opened a formal investigation into suspected anti-competitive behaviour, specifically looking at agreements which it is alleged require companies using Corning's Gorilla Glass to source, quote, all or nearly all of their glass from that company. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is found to have actually happened, and whether, maybe in a couple of years we'll be getting phones with new extra tough glass from other companies that we've never heard of before, because they've been kept down by this behaviour. Or maybe nothing will change. Who knows?
Rise up, monkey glass. John, one last
this was
nib.
actually prompted as a reminder from when we did the live podcast in the pub in London, about a month or so ago, something like that. One of our dear, lovely podsters who was there, and we were talking about Apple Vision Pro. And his question was, I'm about to buy new monitors and stuff for my desk at home. Would I not be better off with Apple Vision Pro and project up from my laptop into my Vision Pro? And I said, hold fire, because the feature is coming which allows you to take your Mac laptop up into your screen and not only just put it there, but also do much wider high resolution modes, much bigger than the native screen of the laptop that you're coming from. And it's shipped. It shipped a couple of nights ago on Vision OS 2.2 beta, and it allows you to have this sort of curved virtual screen in front of you, which can go almost your complete field of view and up to 10,240 by 2880 pixels. And it is seamless, and it is super fast, and you don't even realize it's virtualized in front of you. And you can have an enormous working space on it if you really do want to. And this is one of those key lines in the sand for Vision Pro being useful for people who've got a laptop, maybe traveling salesman in a hotel overnight, or whatever. You can have a huge screen in front of you and not be restricted to whatever size laptop you've got with them. So that is available now in the beta, which is free and available, I think, to everybody.
Ian Clark, for those on Discord, has just posted a picture of the PC Pro podcast mug that Tim kindly granted to everybody who turned up for the podcast.
Oh, sorry, was this Ian Clark I was talking to? No, but possibly not.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, he may have been. Ian was there on the night, so he came a very long way to be there on the night. We appreciate everybody who came along to see us live, and I'm sure we will look to do events again in the future. In the meantime, John always insists that every piece of hardware he brings to the table is fun. Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, he brings a cable.
I do. This is, and please bear with me, because this is a cable, and here it is, and it's a very lovely cable with plugs on. And I know it's going to look like a USB cable, and now I'm going to tell you it's 60 or 70 quid or something like that, and you're going to laugh. However, this is more than just a cable. This is more like a Marks and Spencer's cable. Yes, because yes, it's from no, it's not 60 centimeters, Michael. It is a whole 1 meter long. How about that? This is the first, as far as I know, the first shipping Thunderbolt 5 cable. And Thunderbolt 5 is in the latest MacBook Pros that are shipping tomorrow, along with the Mac Minis that are also shipping tomorrow, based around the M4 chipset. The Thunderbolt 5, if you remember from last week or the week before, is available on the highest spec of the CPU that you can get on the M4 Pro or the M4 Max, or whichever one it is. Yeah. So why is this interesting? Well, of course, Thunderbolt is a defined standard, so we will be seeing this on Dells, we will be seeing this on Lenovo's and all sorts of other things. And the really fun thing is it's 120 gigabits a second throughput and 240 watts, and it's fully backwards compatible, running DAC, asking the question. It's fully backwards compatible with USB-C 4, USB 3, Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 2, etc., etc. So this is now the big daddy of interconnects, because with this you can do anything at maximum speed between any source and any destination. and it's TB5, so it's 120 gigabits a second. Now, you might say 120 gigabits a second, I don't need that. Well, actually, you do. Because if you're, a serious nerd and have decided that that the 10 gigabits a second of a Thunderbolt 4 connector, here we have a 10 gig Ethernet adapter, is not enough, because that's only 40 gigabits a second, not 120 gigabits a second. You will now be able to do 100 gigabit Ethernet out the back of your MacBook Pro or Mac Mini or Intel based, etc., as it comes. And you'll be able to do the 240 watts over it. So this is hotter than snot. I have it here. I bought it because it's fun. And my Mac Mini is, I think, going to arrive on Monday. So the next question is, what am I going to plug into it, John? Because it's not just a host computer and a cable. You've got to have something at the other end. So all the things that you could do with Thunderbolt, like cascading multiple devices and sub-devices off the chain, all possible with this. However, I have found, but just to be helpful, OWC, that lovely company in America, other known as Otherworld Computing, who do lots of pretty high-end and interesting hardware stuff, they have just announced for pre-order a little portable external SSD drive. So it just looks like your usual lump on a desk. Could go in your pocket. 4 terabytes and 2 terabyte size. $399 for 2 terabytes, $599 for 4 terabytes. Sounds a lot, but how about 6,000 megabytes per second of read-write speed? Right? This is monster fast, and it will be plugging in straight into your laptop on Thunderbolt 5, and means that you don't have to be quite so worried about paying Apple's outrageous prices for internal storage, because with TB5 and external storage like this, you can have as much as you want for reasonable money.
You just
Shall
pay
I keep ranting,
OWC,
or is it time for Barry to have some sarcastic comment?
I was just going to say you pay OWC for the outrageous price instead of Apple. I long since have stopped almost caring about Thunderbolt speeds, because they're so fast now that even like at Thunderbolt 3, which I think is on my MacBook M1 here, that there's very little I do that ever even really touches the sides. And okay, I may not be the most hardcore user, but what practical difference is it going to make being able to go at that ridiculous speed?
How about multiple 8K monitors at high refresh rates? The word on the street this morning is that Apple's moving everything to 90 hertz refresh with new 8K monitors coming. And you can have, 3 of them hung off your laptop? And so you really do need to be moving vast amounts of data around, even if it isn't file read-write, for example.
But then the blocker becomes the graphics capabilities of the laptop rather than the connector.
Yes, but it can do that. Because don't forget, M3, M2 could run multiple 6K monitors simultaneously. So this just ups the ante. And the important point to remember about Thunderbolt, which is, John's important tip of the week. It was originally designed by Apple and was called Lightpeak, and was actually originally an optical interface. And then they handed it over to Intel to make it, because they were working on it with Intel. And Intel productized it and called it Thunderbolt. But Apple said we can't have an optical connector on our devices because they will be prone to dirt getting into the optical connectors. It must be an electrical connector, and which is why Thunderbolt has always been an electrical connector. And with Thunderbolt 4, the Thunderbolt 3 world and the USB-C 4 world merged into one unified platform of different layers of speed. We must remember here, was it Corning? Yes, who still does, Thunderbolt 3 on fiber optic, like 80-meter run lengths, running at 40 gigabits a second, but without power, because it's a pure optical connection. And in their little plug at the end there, they have the electrical interface and then the fiber interface all built into the plug. It's amazing tech. And I'm looking forward to them doing 120 gig a second over 80 meters on fiber optic. And for people who need that, which is not Aunt Nelly, but people who do need that, that's going to be a very big thing.
On that note, though, John, is that cable clearly marked as Thunderbolt 5? Like when you put that into
Yeah.
your box of cables, how are you going to know that's the 60 quid one?
You're going to know because it's Apple and it's got beautiful black weave on it, and it feels very, very reassuringly expensive. To answer your question, no, there is no 5 on the Lightning connector. If I can hold it up there, there is no
Ridiculous.
special labeling on there. But hey, we know a song about stupid labeling and USB and so forth, don't we? Because they've managed to change their labeling on almost an annual basis. And yes, we've groaned about that before. So I bought 2 of these things because I think they're going to be fun to play with my Mac Mini 64 gig M4 whatever that's arriving on Monday.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna save my verdict for the time being then. So, Darren, have you got any questions before we open this to the hoi polloi?
I don't have any questions. I will just say that I was a regular attendee at Intel events, the labs days, the developer forums, etc. around the time Light Peak came out. They tell the story slightly differently. They do not credit Apple in any way for any of it. Also, they said, which I thought was quite interesting, they said that it was supposed to be a joint optical and electrical connector, and they found that the speeds they were getting from the electrical made the optical redundant, and it was a way they could very much simplify and cheapen the whole thing by just throwing away the fiber optic component of it, even though they initially thought it would be needed. Anyway, apart from that comment rather than the question, I will save my thoughts for the verdict.
Well, Ian Clark's trying to throw us into some kind of philosophical crisis by asking how can we differentiate voting for Thunderbolt 5 as a medium via this cable versus this cable specifically. We are voting on the cable, Ian. That is the nominated hardware. It is not the technology. It is the cable. So I will open the poll for those on Discord. So you can vote now whether John's Thunderbolt 5 cable is hot or not. And let's start with you, DGS.
Yeah, so at first I've got to say I wasn't very persuaded because, as you say, Barry, current USB and Thunderbolt standards are so fast. I struggle to see a need for a new one. John said that there's a new OWC drive coming out which promises up to 6,000 megabytes a second. Assuming, which I think is a bit of an optimistic assumption, that it can do everything at those speeds, that's still only a 20% uplift over Thunderbolt 4. The rest of Thunderbolt 5's capacity is still not being used.
But that will be the limitation of the SSD drives that they're using in there. But you could still run multiple 6K monitors as well down one cable.
Well, what I have next on my notes is that, but you kind of won me over when you said you could still run multiple 6K monitors over the same cable. So for that, I'm a little bit more. I mean,
with a qualification, if those monitors are Thunderbolt 4, then the bus is going to come down to Thunderbolt 4 speeds.
Yeah.
So obviously we're going to see a refresh from Apple, not only into high refresh at 90 hertz, but also into Thunderbolt 5 on monitors.
Yes, but I am very into daisy chaining. I don't know how doable that is with this. I'm very into it. You know, they say it's better to have bandwidth that you don't need than to need bandwidth you don't have. So in general, you've kind of swung me around a little bit on Thunderbolt 5, which initially I thought was really like Wi-Fi 7 is currently. You know, too much too soon. That said, as Barry points out, we are voting on the cable. And it's not exactly the price. I actually think £60 is not as shocking. I really would have believed an Apple branded cable would be twice that much. But the fact it's not labelled is just insane. It is such an emerging, growing problem that we all have a drawer full of cables with different capabilities, identical connectors, and no way of telling them apart. And they're just contributing to this. That I cannot, in all good conscience, call this cable hot. I'm sorry, it has great capabilities, but it's lost me.
It's
Cold.
69 quid.
Oh, well, that doesn't help either, but no.
The thing that I'm wanting to impress here is, yes, your point about labelling. The thing that I think is very important here is this is not an Apple-only thing. We will be seeing this across a whole estate of high-end laptops, desktops, etc. over the coming months. I suspect CES will have an awful lot of Thunderbolt 5 stuff there, at least at the higher-end products. So this is not an Apple technology. You're not tied into using Apple's cables.
No, of course.
It's just that they happen to be shipping it tomorrow.
Yeah, no, that's totally understood. Yes, but Apple or anyone ought to be labeling their cables if they're special, expensive, super high bandwidth cables. We shouldn't be relying on remembering that
I
this
think
is the
Apple
graded
would
one.
take that kind of ever so slightly snooty view, which is, well, this is the new normal. Of course, you
Yes.
would be using this.
Okay, Darren, were you hot or not?
Not
Not. So I'm. Obviously that kind of speed is fantastic and lovely. I'm going to go a step further. I think these labels and the ports now should be color coded, so that the connector, either the connector or the cable itself, is say red for Thunderbolt 5, and the connector's red, so you can see what it is, and that should be an industry standard applied across the board. And it's so annoyed me that they haven't even marked this thing, because I know what will happen, because it'll go on my desk here, and I can't, as I currently am, can't work out which is the high speed cable, which is, and
But is that,
it would get lost.
in fairness, Barry, and I'm not in any way defending Apple because I think it should have been labelled TB5 or have a 5 on there without question. Is this much worse than USB SS,
No.
some strange nonsense thing? The USB consortium is just as bad here.
100%.
And in fact, if you look at laptops out there, you'll have laptops which have got what ostensibly look like USB-C ports, but actually different capabilities on different ports on one side, you know? And that's just incredibly annoying. So I think the whole industry is pretty bad on that front, and I totally agree with you there for certain.
Yeah, I agree. Well, absolutely all as bad as one another. But yeah, sorry, I just can't bring myself to vote for it on that basis. Someone's saying I hate the colourblind. I do take that point, but there is a way to label these things that doesn't exclude people. But John, I take it you're in the hot camp.
Well, I've been with Thunderbolt since Thunderbolt 1. I think it's been great technology. This kind of data rate stuff for stringing stuff together, and especially what Corning did for the long distance stuff. As I said, I was waving around an OWC 10 gig Ethernet port, which it gives you full raw 10 gig Ethernet off my M1 MacBook Air. So this kind of technology exists. We will be seeing a whole bunch of desktop units, expansion ports, drive rack arrays, and all sorts of stuff that exist at the moment on Thunderbolt 4 will be available on Thunderbolt 5. And clearly there's a whole bunch of Apple monitors going to be coming, which will undoubtedly be supporting this. So for me, it's hot because it's Thunderbolt 5, and this just happens to be, as far as I know, the first shipping cable you can actually go out and buy to plug into a computer you can't use today, but you can tomorrow, because that's when they're arriving out with everybody.
Literally tomorrow's technology.
Yep.
So on the poll, I'm afraid it's a narrow defeat there, as well as it has been in the studio, by 10 votes to 12. And
well, to be honest here,
two
Barry,
spoiled ballots.
given it's John talking about an Apple product, I'm surprised I got so much positivity. So
Well, it could have won if they'd just spent 2 pence printing a 5 on the plug. It's crazy.
Yeah, think about it, Apple, next time. Okay, thank you very much to everyone who's joined us live on Discord. Thank you to my dear colleagues here. We will be back next week. Go and buy that PC Pro magazine in the meantime, and we'll see you next Thursday. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, as ever, it's been an honour serving with you. See you all next week.
See you later.
Now.
Take care.
Now we need to